All right, guys, so this is part two where we get into EQ and compression. And the goal for this is to just kind of clean up some of the mud and stuff we don't really need in the mix and boost more of the stuff that we want, okay? And I'm going to move pretty quick through this because there's a lot to do and I don't want this to take up too much time. So just follow along with what I do, and when I come to something important, I'll try to explain it to you guys. But right off the bat, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a track stack. So I'll select everything, go to track, create track stack, and we're going to do a summing stack. And the reason I do this is because it's going to route all the individual drum tracks to this one drum bus. So what this allows us to do is put effects on this one track, and that's going to create global changes for the entire drum sound at once. So I picked this up from Stephen Slate from his drum mixing tutorial where he calls this top-down processing. And I think it's a pretty interesting technique, and I've been doing it for the past, couple months, and I think I like it. So we'll go ahead and color this. We'll call it drums. Okay, so we'll start with the drum bus, and we'll put a linear phase EQ on here. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just trying to cut down some of the super lows, cut down on some of the low mids, and just put a very slight shelf on the top end, okay? Okay, so that's good for that. That just kind of cleans everything up a little bit, and just makes it a little bit brighter. So we'll go on to the compressor. And guys, I'm actually a fan of starting with presets and then tweaking them from there. I know that, a lot of guys look down on that because it's, not very professional, but if you're not Dave Pensato, then you know what? You got to start with a preset and then just, take it from there. Okay, so for the drum bus, I like to start with the VCA soft kit. So turn down the makeup gain. We'll see what this does here. So my goal with this is to just catch some of the transients coming through with the kick and snare, just to kind of control that a little bit. I'm not trying to squash the entire drum sound. I'm just trying to make everything a little more cohesive. So bring this up a little bit. Okay, that's good for that. Now this next plugin is probably my favorite plugin just because it's so easy. This is the Soft Tube Saturation Knob, and this is a free plugin, so if you guys don't have this, definitely download it and try it out. It's the simplest plugin in the world to use. You basically just have one knob that you turn up and down. And you got a couple controls here, but I just usually keep this set to neutral. So let's see what this does here. That's pretty cool, right? It just kind of saturates everything, makes everything sound a lot more full. So I use a saturation knob, and the last thing I like to use is this Audio Assault Transient Designer. So this is another free plugin, so you guys should check this out. I go super subtle with this. Let's see here. Okay, so not really changing it too much. It just kind of makes everything hit a little bit harder with the transients. So just with those 4 plugins, we've made a pretty big difference here. So let's start with the before. And after. It's kind of crazy, right? How much you can change it with just one drum bus. Okay, so that's what we'll do for that. Let's move on to the individual tracks. So for the overheads, I pretty much just put an EQ on here. Again, cutting down on anything below about 40, 45. And I actually like to pull down the high end on my overheads just a little bit because they're a little bit harsh, a little bit bright. So I'm always trying to control my overheads a little bit. So I just pull down the shelf about 1 dB starting at about 5K. All right. So nothing crazy. That's pretty much all I do for the overheads. So we'll move on to the kick here. And as you can see, I always like to start with the EQ first and then use a compressor. I know there's a lot of debate about that, but to me it just makes more sense to put the EQ first before the compressor, but we can argue about that in the comments if you guys want. So let's see what we got here. Again, just cutting everything below about 40. I like to cut around that 350 range. Put a boost here. Let me grab a better section. I actually like to pull down a lot of the high end out of the kick so it's not so clicky. You can hear how that's pretty clicky. Because I'm not playing metal or rock or anything. I just want like a natural balanced kick that's, pretty punchy. So I usually pull this down to about that 5K range. 5 to 7K. Okay, that's good for that. Go to the compressor, and for this I like to use the Type R kick drum. So I'll turn the gain off, turn the makeup gain down, and we'll see what we start with here. Okay, just kind of controlling it a little bit. And I like this distortion knob that's built into the compressor in Logic, so I like to keep this on soft for the kick. You can hear that difference, right? Okay, so that's pretty much all I do for the kick, just some EQ and compression. So let's hear what that sounds like in the mix. Okay, and I pretty much do the same thing on the kick out. I just pull down a little bit more the high end. Because I don't want those cymbals in there. just blend it, you know, very subtly. I don't use too much of this. Okay, moving on to the snare. I actually like to use, I start with the cleanup snare. Pull back some of this low end. And I like to put the, I like to boost around that 200 range because there's some fatness there. You hear that? Right there. So I kind of like to boost that a little bit. Keep this down. Pull down the shelf a little bit. Okay, that's good for that. For the compressor, I like to do the VCA snare. So my goal with this is to just kind of control those rim shot transients, kind of just pull those down a few dB. I play a lot of ghost notes and stuff, so I don't want my snare to be super squashed. I want there to still be a dynamic range between the ghost notes and the high transients. So I just put a pretty subtle compressor on the snare. Okay. And I also like to use the transient designer on the snare as well. So, and again, very subtle. Okay, snare bottom, pretty much just drag these over, keep the same settings. I barely mix in the snare bottom at all, so let's see here. Just to where I can hear it a little bit. And that's pretty much all I do for that. Okay, and for the rack toms, again, cutting a lot of the low end out. Let me isolate these here. Sometimes Logic bugs out on me. So I like to boost around that 120 to 150 range for the toms, cut a lot of the low end out because that creates a lot of rumble from the kick drum in the toms. So I like to cut a lot of that out and bring up some of the high end here. Usually around that 5 to 10K. Okay, and then for the compressor, I like to use the opto toms. Again, same deal. So I'm just trying to, you know, control it a few dB, nothing too crazy. So I usually just copy and paste these over to the floor tom. I changed the EQ a little bit on the floor tom, so I pull this down a little bit, get a little bit more of this low end. Okay, let's hear what we started with. And hear the difference. So, pretty big difference, you know, just with a lot of small changes, those all add up to create a really big difference between what you started with and what you end up with. So keep that in mind whenever you're mixing. So that's going to do it for part 2. And part 3, we're going to get into reverb, which is really important.